Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Hustle Career Pathway 101. We are so happy to be back with fresh conversations and real insights into today's most in demand digital career paths. I'm Shamima, and I'm joined as always by my wonderful co host Shahida.
Hey everyone! Today's episode is extremely pivotal for every one of us. We are talking about something that's reshaping digital marketing careers in a big way: data.
Today's episode is called Data as Marketing's New Currency, and we are starting with a simple idea. Digital marketing isn't just about creativity anymore, it's about data, trust, and risk. In many ways, data has become one of the most valuable assets a marketer manages.
To give you a sense of scale, according to Supermetrics' 2025 Marketing Data Report, marketers are working with 230% more data than they were in 2020, and 87% now rely heavily on first party data as privacy regulations continue to reshape how marketing works.
What's interesting is that despite all this data, there's still gap. Only 16% of marketers are using zero-party data customers willingly share, even though it's one of the most accurate and privacy-friendly source available.
And technology is moving fast. The use of AI and machine learning has jumped from 50% to 72%, which means decisions are happening faster than ever.
But with that speed comes responsibility. 60% of consumers say transparency matters, 44% avoid brands after a data breach, and according to IBM, the average cost of a breach is now over $4 million. So when data becomes currency, trust becomes everything.
That's why we're thrilled to welcome our guest today, Peter Kosmala.
Peter is a globally recognized privacy and digital media leader with over 25 years of experience working at the intersection of advertising, technology, policy, and consumer trust. He's a course developer and instructor for privacy programs at York University and Digital Advertising Alliance of Canada and an executive advisor to the European Interactive Digital Advertising.
He's also held senior leadership roles at organizations like Roku, the 4As, and the Digital Advertising Alliance, helping shape global standards around data privacy, transparency, and responsible use of emerging technologies, including AI.
Peter, welcome to Digital Hustle. We're so excited to have you with us.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Shamima. Shahida, it's great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Peter, let's start big picture. From your perspective, how has marketing evolved from being primarily a creative function into something that looks much more like a data-driven risk function today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I respond to it with a bit of remorse because at least the advertising part of marketing, I've always considered to be a creative profession, and that's what defines it. And I sort of lament the loss of that if we're sort of moving away from pure creativity into pure data. I'm not so sure these are companies that are really meant to be data companies, but they're adapting and they're realizing that there's a lot of value there. So yes, I would say on the one hand, data's actually always been part of the marketing puzzle. It's just much more deep now, I think, in terms of its relationship to marketing activities. There's more of it. There are more opportunities to gather it. It's a lot more granular in its detail. And yet amongst that, we have to be very thoughtful about how consumer attitudes and expectations are evolving as well. There's personalization, of course, personalization of services, of campaigns, of products. And it seems on the one hand, consumers expect us to know more about them as brands, to be, timely in the moment where they're thinking of something or considering a purchase or need more information. And yet at the same time, they don't want to be interrupted. They don't want to be diverted. They don't want to feel creeped out by you knowing too much about them. So it's an interesting balance where we have to respect those preferences. else we lose them as marketers, which is the worst outcome. We fear that even more than, say, a fine or a sanction or even a lawsuit in a certain sense, is the loss of the customer over that lifetime. And yet, we necessarily have to know something about them if they want more relevant services, if they want us to be timely in our interactions with them as brands. So we have to strike that balance between using the data that we have now in much richer volumes and in greater detail, and yet using that responsibly to engage with consumers in a way that they would expect and aren't offended by.
And it's also important that consumers could actually interpret them easily in a simple way, the way which could not confuse them.
And we're seeing more, another piece of this too that I ought to raise is increased regulatory attention. So, governments, consumer protection authorities, ministers of justice or attorneys general are paying closer attention to these issues from a consumer protection standpoint. And so we're seeing more laws that dictate these practices. They could be overarching privacy laws that govern a lot of practices, or they could be certain rules or regulations directed specifically at marketing. And they're looking at this. So we have to be aware of that. And that's part of the risk management dimension as well. The thing that even regulators are coming to understand, however, is that things like market segmentation, or audience targeting are not new developments. And simply the fact that we're now doing them more digitally doesn't fundamentally change the intent or the purpose. So that's something I always like to remind my regulatory friends is like, we've been doing market segmentation literally for decades. It's not inherently illegal. But today, just given that things are more complex, we just have to be very ethical, responsible about how we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agreed.
Well, this kind of makes me question the risks that are involved now because there's so much data involved in marketing. So, according to you, Peter, what kinds of risks are marketers managing now that simply did not exist 10 to 15 years ago?
Very good question. Again, recognizing that data use in marketing itself is not new, so I wouldn't suggest that that's a new challenge. I think more than anything, especially now, it's how technology is accelerating this, and specifically AI, which seems so unwieldy in a number of ways. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it today, but it's such an evolving technology that I think marketers are still trying to understand exactly how do I use it. Some are feeling compelled to use it because competitive brands are, or they feel like their consumers are expecting it in some capacity. But it can be dangerous if not used properly. And we're still figuring out what it's capable of doing and what it can do well and what it can't do so well. So I think that's really it, is the increased use of technology, the increased prevalence of it in consumer lifestyles. It's now an integral part of not just how we work, but how we communicate, how we travel, how we spend our leisure time. So we need to understand it more deeply as marketers. It's no longer simply understanding consumer behaviors or looking at demographic profiles or doing these things. It's saying, how is technology playing into this for the consumer? How should we leverage it in a way that makes sense? And not we're just like we feel compelled to. We can do it because we can, but should we? And asking those, I think, thoughtful questions.
So, Peter, what I could understand that data is as a form of power. So, why do you think data is now considered a currency, and what responsibility comes with that for marketers?
That's a great choice of word. I want to point to a book that I recommend by Carissa Veliz called Privacy is Power. And she talks very much about literally that, how it can be leveraged by institutions like governments or law enforcement authorities, large corporations, in a way that benefits them and not so much the people. But it can be something that consumers, individuals, citizens, residents can seize, can take back if they understand what utility, what controls, what information they have at their disposal to control how their personal information is used. I think it's a fair assumption that among informed consumers today, they sort of expect that their information is being used in some way. Yes, there are those that are fundamentally opposed to it, but you'd have to drop off the grid, literally, to ensure that you're truly anonymous. I mean, anonymity really isn't possible anymore. But that doesn't mean to suggest that you can't live a healthy, safe, privacy protective lifestyle if everyone engaged in it is following the rules.
But I do feel like to have the knowledge of how to protect yourself from these seemingly frequent data breaches. Because I say it from a perspective of a computer science graduate. So I understand what data is, what can data do, the power, how is it a currency. But to a layman or to a person who is not used to understanding the power of data, it's hard for them to understand like what information should I share online or when should I click okay, I consent. Because a lot of people they do not go through all the terms and conditions. And I believe that that's where the stigma stems from, like tracking is your enemy. So what can those people do to avert from that mindset of being afraid of technology and just wanting to fall off the grid totally, which is, as you said, impractical. You can't do it in this time and age.
No, it's a good question. I think not to put this all on consumers or individuals, but there are some things that you can take, some steps you can take, some awareness that you can encourage within yourself, and sort of a sense of responsibility, honestly. I'm not one of those people that's going to say, laws will come to your rescue. Don't worry. Just please stand by while the law takes effect, because it does take a while. No, actually, there's responsibilities that you can take. And one of them would be, and I teach this at York, is even among the professionals responsible for ensuring privacy professionals, is to look at the circumstance and the context. So don't feel compelled to respond if you're in a situation having a conversation with a brand. Obviously, I'm speaking to individuals now, to consumers. But when you're interacting with a company, if you're in the midst or if you're contemplating a transaction, again, online, you're looking to obtain information. If there's a compulsion to respond, if you're being forced to make an action to get to that information, you don't have to surrender to that. First of all, that's inconsistent with law. Compulsory consent is illegal in most situations under privacy law. You need to give your consent freely, unambiguously, voluntarily. You want to be informed. So slow down. Just ask questions. Do a little bit of research. Is this what it purports to be? Is this a fake? Is this a real company? Am I being phished? These sorts of exploits that are common right now. Look at the context. Maybe I'm willing to give my postal code, but I'd like to know, is it specific to this context to receive, for example, weather information, or tailor my online experience to a sports team that's my favorite that would be obviously localized to where I live or the city I'm in? That makes sense. But am I assured that this information is not going to be used for other purposes, or you're going to hang on to it and use it for other things? You press for those details. And yes, reading a policy is not always helpful, but you can take the initiative. And if things don't feel right, you pull out of that situation immediately and you go to the brands that you trust and you invest more time there. And frankly, know your rights under law. That's easy enough. I mean, look at the Charter here in Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Privacy is not explicitly quoted in that framework, but this notion of freedom from intrusion upon seclusion is. So your private space, and if we want to look at this as more than just my home or my belongings or my person and expand that into my data space, I think there's a reasonable argument there that I should not be intruded, that information should not be observed, surveilled, held, procured in any way without my awareness and my consent.
I'll go a little bit deeper into the systems and data design. So, Peter, where do you see the biggest data security vulnerabilities in modern digital marketing campaigns today?
I see it in the partnerships and the vendor relationships that are struck. I think the brands themselves, the marketers, even if you're not a global multinational, well-known international brand, maybe you're a more mid-sized marketer, but for the most part, at the end of the day, these are companies. They're not just marketers. They're companies that offer consumer goods or financial services or even technology itself. They tend to have a pretty, a pretty regimented system in terms of people, security officers, privacy officers, hopefully, systems that have been architected in a way to secure as best they can, doesn't prevent against all eventualities, that has secured that information. I'm concerned about their vendor relationships. And in the advertising sphere, that's not to pin this on people, but let's just talk frankly. The agency, it could be another consultant or practitioner. It could be, audience measurement firm. It could be someone who handles ad creative in an optimized way. There's ad tech providers, the actual delivery of the ads. So these are all companies that work in partnership with the brand or on behalf of the brand or for the agency on behalf of the brand. But in any event, they are downstream entities. And I can't say with confidence that they have the same level of security and privacy that these large brands do. And yet the brands necessarily are trusting this downward flow of, marketing and advertising messages to their customers through these third parties. That's also not coincidentally one of the biggest areas of information risk today in terms of breaches. Most breaches are coming from either internal parties. It could be an aggrieved employee, but there's also just innocuous or benign mistakes. Oops, I left that folder out and I shouldn't have, or, I didn't close my screen, but I left my desk, these sorts of things. But Further from that, the largest source are external sources. So vendors, if it's data storage, if it's another one of these companies that I've mentioned, do they have the same level of attention and policy and practice? Are their employees properly trained on that? Because that's where it's going. But ultimately, the exposure comes back to the brand because the consumer never sees these intermediaries. Unless they're into advertising, they don't even know the name of the ad agencies. They just see the brand, as they should, because that's the message that comes forward. But the risk, obviously, is that if anything wrong happens, if that information is misused, it's lost or compromised, there's a breach, that is coming back to the brand. And even some marketers who feel rather naively that, oh, well, that's the vendor's problem. They caused the issue. It's like, no.
It impacts the brand.
It does impact the brand in terms of consumer perception. You could lose those customers. You could have to wade your way through a pretty nasty public reputation situation that you have to recover from. But I think even more acutely, you're going to hear from the regulator. The privacy commissioner is going to come after you, the brand, and the others too. But it's not going to single out. It's not going to take the excuse that, well, that you didn't cause this directly, therefore you're not responsible. No, they're your customers. You're responsible, as is everyone else downstream.
When you're talking about the external and internal parties, so when it comes to data security vulnerabilities, is mostly due to the misalignment of the security level of these parties, which is happening now?
It could be. And let's be fair, the alignment can occur in several ways. Let me give some vendors some credit. There's some very smart vendors out there, whether they're agencies, ad delivery or ad tech companies. And it could go in the reverse direction where the brand is the one that doesn't have the appropriate security and privacy procedures. So yes, alignment is huge and it goes both ways. You've got to make sure you're speaking the same language. You've established the same standard and protocols. Everyone's aware at a human level, because I'm not a big fan of automating this stuff. I want real people on it who know. And I think most importantly, even if it's aligned, is that consistent with law? Is that consistent with customer expectation? Make sure that's the case. If that's all the case, and yes, that's a lot of work, but that's why we have privacy professionals.
Yeah.
And that's why we have courses like I do at York that train people on this. Then everything's good. When everything runs smoothly, it's beautiful. Consumers are getting the benefits they seek and want. They trust the brand. And even though they may not see all these intermediaries, that sort of level of quality and expectation is carrying through from the brand to the consumer, and trust is enabled. And by the way, that's what privacy is. If you have to define it with a word other than privacy, it's that. It's trust.
Exactly. So, Peter, how do poorly designed databases or data systems actually increase risk for marketing teams?
Well, it's not a challenge that I would say is unique to marketing per se. That's a problem for anyone. That's a problem for an energy company, a mining or manufacturing company, a consumer brand. That's a vulnerability, and that's going to be exploited. Are there ad-specific information risks like malvertising, malicious advertising, or ads that get compromised or hacked in some way or become carriers of malicious software? All of those are possibilities, and they do exist. But in the threat landscape, those are relatively smaller to things like major organizational breaches or ransomware incidents that are being launched against entire companies, brands. So that's where it starts to focus in on this could happen to any organization. Yes. Do you have the proper, safeguards and procedures in place? Not necessarily to prevent it, because it may happen, but to respond to it or mitigate that risk as much as possible and to respond quickly.
All right. So I do believe that we have touched a little bit on the misunderstanding that happens related to data between consumers and marketing agencies, because there are so many third parties involved in the whole process, but the consumers don't see it. So if I dig a little bit deeper into that conversation, Peter, which are the common technical misunderstandings you see within the marketers related to data storage, tracking, or overall data security?
I think for marketers, we have to address a tendency, which is the appetite for data and this notion that, yes, I want it all and I want to use it in every possible way and I want to keep it and use it for a secondary purpose that I haven't even imagined yet. Those are tendencies that, let's be honest, we've held those for many years. Maybe we're entitled to them in a certain way. But over the years, as data becomes a bigger driver of this, that's becoming a very risky habit. So no, you can't have access to all the data. Yes, you have to use it for a very specific permissioned purpose. And once you've exhausted that purpose, I obtained this information so that I can give you this offer that's tailored to a certain interest of yours. Once I've exhausted that, or once I've delivered on that promise, that's it. Like, I don't get to keep that and then like turn around and sell you a different product next time. For that, I have to go back and get consent again. So it's forcing ourselves into what may appear to be rudimentary practices, but these have to occur because these are the essence of consumer trust, and these are the basis of the legal requirements as well. So it's disabusing this tendency that we've had for a long time to be more disciplined in what we're doing, to make sure we have the permissions to not overuse, to not keep it, retain it beyond a reasonable period of time. And again, these are best practices for all organizations, but I think they're particularly the case for marketing, just given our appetite for data and how we've been about this historically.
So, do you suggest that any duration, that how long companies should actually keep their old data and then not having, piling up?
Laws and regulations force a certain awareness on this, certainly. I mean, if you're in an industry that's already regulated and you're a marketer, you're a financial services brand, you're a telecoms brand, you're an energy brand, you're sort of used to the scrutiny already. So fitting your privacy practices into that scheme should be pretty straightforward. Like, you're used to being analyzed for your financial practices, maybe, or your workflow safety, or your employee conduct, or any of these things. Income's personal information, you need to be disciplined about that as well. That's easy to fit in. However, there are some companies, marketers who are a little more risk resistant, edgy, maybe a fashion forward marketer, or someone who's like an app developer delivering products to teens, or audiences that, I don't want to generalize, but have maybe a little bit more of a tolerance as to what's being used, or looking like, I'll give you this information if I get a free offer in return, which some folks would object to. That's where they have to be smarter, or they're going to learn rather painfully that that's not tolerated anymore.
We are seeing new hybrid roles pop up inside marketing teams. What kinds of security or data focused roles are you seeing more often now?
I think of all the roles we've talked about previously is data governance, and maybe even as an adjunct to that, AI governance. It's this notion that, yes, let's leverage data, or let's leverage AI solutions specifically, but let's do it in an organized way where we're ascribing to certain principles of practice or certain policies we've created just for this, and we adhere to those, as opposed to sort of taking it in wholesale. And that's a lot of work, and that's not something you can simply drop in the lap of arguably an existing privacy professional. You could, but we're seeing this sort of start to emerge as its own discipline, because there is so much to understand about the technology and what it can do, about what the consumer impacts are. And that includes, harms to individuals potentially, things like algorithmic bias, making decisions that they're not about things that are very serious, like credit worthiness or housing availability or employment opportunities in different contexts, that if AI makes the wrong decision, that really can adversely impact an individual. Things like automated decision making, where AI is making decisions where really it should be advising your decisions, right? But the more you automate that, the less human intervention, the higher the risk or the potential negative outcome. Sure, there's some positive ones too, but and would have you intercepted that? So that's where there's a whole body of responsibility that organizations are starting to understand, and realizing that this is its own discipline. And maybe they don't call it specifically data governance, but chances are they do, and that's definitely within the portfolio. Let me be clear, it's not something that squarely falls into as an attorney, for example. It shouldn't just be a legal professional. It's not something that should be solely owned by an IT professional. It's sort of a hybrid of all these. It's policy driven. It can't be too beholden to law, because law is going to have a heck of a time keeping up with this. So if you bank it all on what the law says, you'll be like several cycles behind on what the real harms are.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about hybrid roles. Can you shed some light on how are these roles different from traditional marketing roles?
Well, first of all, it's the volumes of the data, and it's things like AI, and also some other technologies that could be relevant, that include things like, quantum's on the horizon, but that's going to change everything. Things like blockchain technology, that's another, or Internet of Things, the idea of smart objects, or, AR and VR, exactly, where you're sort of simulating environments. A lot of promise there initially, but it kind of slowed down for a bit. But if you're sort of creating simulated environments, which can be very exciting, that's, a brand can really create its own environment for the user. But, again, if you're leveraging personal information, you have to figure out how to do that smartly, in a way that users are aware and comfortable with, and again, consistent with law. So an old, I hesitate to say, that may be focused on CRM. So just, customer relationship management, been around forever, essentially leveraging the data that you have to be smarter in your relations with customers. But that's blown way out now because these technologies are so powerful and so much more expansive in what they can do that role doesn't quite contain it. So I think we're going to see some roles that we haven't even thought about yet, to be honest, that are going to tailor this to in ways that marketers can use. But again, the new part of this is going to be an increased discipline. And that's difficult to achieve, I understand, because we've just been so accustomed to it in the past.
Peter, you have already mentioned about several roles. So, which of these roles do you think will be most in demand over the next 5 years?
Well, data science is probably one of these, but I have to say personally, I feel very ambivalent about this. No disrespect. You asked at the very top of the program, are we creative or are we data driven? And my answer is, can't we be both?
Both, yeah.
And I don't, because frankly, I don't think marketing is not data science. It can leverage that expertise. But again, I'm uncomfortable with the notion that it's all data driven. And at the end of the day, customers don't want you to know tons of things about them as much as they want to be delighted. They want to be entertained, engaged, intrigued by who you are as a brand and what you can do and what you bring. That delivers a level of, I think, comfort, stimulation, however you want to describe it, that is unique, that is or can be partly reliant on the data, but doesn't have to be built on that entirely. What's really going to, I think, cement that relationship is how creative you are with it, how innovative you are with it. And don't lose sight of that.
Let's talk career growth. What technical or data skills do you see having the biggest impact on digital marketers' salary today?
Well, I mean, you can go full throttle here and become a developer or engineer. You could immerse yourself in that side. You can do that. I don't know that it's entirely necessary, though. I think what is necessary is to be fluent in it, is to understand it at a literal level. How much do you truly understand at a layperson's level what the technology can do, how that's relevant to marketing, how that can be effectively but responsibly leveraged? That, I think, is incumbent upon you to do the reading or talk to the people or seek out the forums or the conversations or the online chat groups, much of which is free. And as long as they're valid audiences, people you can trust, there's much to learn there. There's a great community, I think, especially here in Canada and in Toronto specifically, a great technology community in a marketing vein that can help you out, to help you understand that. So to get more fluent with that and just more understanding of what's possible. But if you do love it, if that lights a flame within you in the tech, then by all means pursue that. So I think for those who want to succeed, it's understanding that, just to be conversant in it. It's also really understanding how ad tech works and how martech works, which is kind of a segment of technology. I mean, if you could know databases at a general level, but I think understanding how they're used specifically in the marketing context is a little different. So understand that. And if you want to go deep there, those are the engines that are running these programs and these campaigns. And that's where the data is going to be siphoned into, or where it resides already. So the better you know that and how it works and the mechanics, or how maybe a new marketer that's not invested in that yet, but wants to be, you can really help them. And if you can demonstrate the returns and the profit, you will be rewarded handsomely.
You have already mentioned about the skills, but how valuable is basic knowledge of databases, analytics, or even light programming for marketers who want to move into higher paying roles?
I think, sort of further to my prior response, it's more of a personal decision on your part, how much technical knowledge you want to leverage, how far, how deep, and frankly, how comfortable you are with that depth that you want to go. I don't want to dissuade folks from going in that direction. If they love technology as I do, I'm not a developer, by the way, but I love speaking with them. Many are friends. So if you want to go in that direction, by all means, embrace it. But I don't think it's necessary. I think it's, again, if you have a competence, you can demonstrate a competency in it. And I think more importantly, just understand the mechanics of it and can leverage that. I tend to look at, what skills are going to succeed, frankly, at a higher level. To me, if you can be multidisciplinary, that's more important than what technical domain shall I master. I'll let you decide which domain appeals to you and what you have seen may have value. But my point is, be multidisciplinary. So don't just specialize in one thing. I think it's better to have some understanding of marketing tech, advertising tech, the strategy side, the planning side. Spread yourself a bit, because you're going to have those conversations. And especially given the broad deployment of AI today, it's not in one discipline, it's not in one industry, it's not at one level. So you're going to run into it in multiple places. So if you can understand it in all those contexts, that's all the better. Another real good skill to have is critical thinking. Just ask the questions, push back a bit. Ask critical questions of the people coming to you with the marketing spec and the audiences it defined and what they want to do with the data. And kind of push back a little bit if you feel like that's a little too expansive, or maybe it's not adhering to the purpose as much as it should. And be respectful. This is not about picking fights. It's not about stopping things. It's just about being proactive, but in a way that's reasonable and that's aligned with what people actually want.
We have been talking about the soft skills a little bit. So, for the early marketers or the students who are going to graduate, what advice do you have for them in terms of, let's say, micro credentials? Because the roles are becoming hybrid, it's only natural to have a multidisciplinary approach. So, for those students, which micro credentials or side quests would you be suggesting them?
Well, I'm going to push privacy, of course. I think there's much value in understanding it, even if it's not in a professional context. You just know what your rights are as a global citizen. I mean, there's a lot of commonality here at a principles level as to what various nations and their people expect of you when it comes to personal information. Personal information drives a lot of this. I can't imagine a marketing activity, unless it's B2B, that isn't involving consumers. So if you can really understand that and demonstrate that understanding, and if you want to take it to a professional level, do it. Like, get certified in privacy. But there are lots of great courses. Of course, I'm going to plug York, but that is designed, our program at York in information privacy is designed for professionals in government, in industry, at any level. For people, though, even if you sat in on classes, you would learn a lot just as a Canadian. Like, oh, I'm going to think differently about that next time, or I'm going to be more diligent about reading that policy next time, right? So you're going to have that awareness. Security as well, that's in partner with it. I don't consider privacy to be a subset of security, by the way. I think
Okay.
they're different disciplines completely, but I admire and respect my colleagues in security. They have a lot to manage. They're in charge of protecting all assets, not just personal information, but anything that's sensitive, as you probably know. That can, maybe this gets out of the marketing realm, but that can be things like designs or patents or confidential information. They have to protect that. But the challenge that privacy folks have that security folks don't is that security by and large is universal. So, a firewall or a perimeter control or these sorts of things in Toronto, Ontario are probably going to be the same as in Singapore, as in London, UK. But that's not the case with privacy. The laws and even the expectations are dramatically different. So those are different disciplines. Those are good to know. I mentioned AI governance. That's another you might want to pursue. The professional credentials in these fields are pretty heavy, like they go all the way. I'm sure there are lighter weight, as you say, micro credentials you could pursue that are out there. So I would pursue these areas where personal data is intersecting with people, with companies, with systems. If you can understand the data behaviors, best practices around it, where's it stored, who has access to it, how long do we keep it, retention. You start to get informed, and you don't have to be an attorney or a technologist. You just start to get immersed in the practical, responsible steps you can take.
So this is also a great way to enhance the data privacy readiness and then the awareness, because it's very important that people should know what privacy all about, what people could share, which one couldn't be shared. So that sort of readiness is important among the normal people, consumers, and those who are even planning to get the data from the consumer. So both sides, the givers and receivers, both sides, they have to have that kind of awareness that the privacy and the first-party data, zero-party data, all those sort of things they should be aware about.
They should, and actually, that's how privacy gets solved, but we're not there yet. There has to be awareness and a sense of responsibility among all parties. So that means individuals, consumers. That means companies, marketers. That also means institutions, governments, and regulators. And, we haven't mentioned them yet, advocates and activists, people who are actually out there doing work for you, fighting for your rights, pushing for stronger laws and controls, voicing your concerns in government forums, in public, in town hall meetings, etc. They're there as well. But everybody owns a piece of that right now. And I think that where I would sort of place the pendulum at the moment is it's swayed over to law a lot right now. There's a lot of people pushing for law reform, more laws, tougher laws. And, consumers are kind of sitting it out, waiting for it to take place. Companies are too, because they're not going to do anything until the law is formalized. I mean, why? Their mentality is privacy and security are whatever the law tells me to do, nothing else. And I don't think those are smart behaviors, frankly. I think consumers can be smarter about what they're providing, about the questions they're asking, about the organizations they deal with. Reasonable questions. Marketers can take more responsibility and discipline in what they're doing. It's not the marketing of old. We're in a new era now. Great promise. If done right, great benefits. But if done wrong, hugely adverse outcomes, worse than before. And governments can understand that it's not all up to them, frankly, and there's things that laws and regulations can't do naturally. Law and regulation can be very powerful, but remember, it's slow to develop. It's consensus-based, highly deliberative, and most critically, when it's put into force, it's locked in time. It's that law as of that day, that year. Imagine if there was an AI law that went into force in 2020 before ChatGPT went into effect, or it was made broadly available in 2022, and the world changed. It may not have anything to say about ChatGPT, right? So laws can be amended, but it takes a long time. And what about technology, especially AI? It's the opposite. It's fast moving, highly adaptive, constantly evolving. So law is a mismatch for technology in that sense. And that's why I've been stressing today a lot of discussion around practical and discipline. And this is more self-reliant, but we have to figure out ways to instill that in the marketing professionals we know.
Exactly. So, as someone who teaches and works closely with students, what skill gaps do you most often see between marketing graduates and industry expectations?
So what is the industry expecting from folks? Help in understanding this and sorting through it. I think if you're a practitioner coming perhaps new to a marketing team or operation or a company, they want to know what you can bring in a way that maybe they don't have or they're not quite as sophisticated. And if you can demonstrate that, I understand not everybody can, but if you can bring that crucial element that adds that, solves that gap, takes them in a direction they feel will improve, that's hugely important. But of course, each situation is different. You'll have to identify what that need is. But that again falls back on, taking the initiative to do the learning, to network with the people, to do the reading, to get the micro credential that just informs you and I think positions you from a market profile perspective in a superior way than otherwise would, right? So that's a good step.
All right, Peter. So we have talked a lot about security and privacy and marketing and data as a currency and all of that. So if you had to wrap everything up and let all the listeners know, where is data taking us in the future?
There's going to be a lot more of it, of course, and there's going to be very powerful technologies driving it. So I think that puts the additional pressure on marketers and on the professionals within marketers to not just control the risks, but realize what is the value of the data. And that's the challenge: is how do you realize the value that you are legitimately entitled to? There's nothing inherently evil about realizing legitimate value from personal information, as long as customers are involved, aware, and they permissioned it for that purpose. That's all good. But realizing that over time, I think, is going to become more of a balancing act. So as I suggested earlier, marketers, I think, are coming out of a phase, whether they realized it or not, where they had sort of more open license to do a lot of things. And that's changing in part because, yes, laws and regulations, but also consumer expectations. Consumers are far more digitally literate now. They know what happens online. They know the good and the bad. They're asking a little bit more. They still want to be involved with brands. They still want to have conversations with them. As I mentioned earlier, they want brands that know them well, but within reason. To know me is not to follow me around. It's not
To
to
creep me out.
creep
No.
me out. Exactly. So where do you place that needle? And I'm not going to give the secret sauce out today because that's going to differ by brand in terms of the industry you're in and the kind of, the brand vibe you want to give off, what your brand stands for, what it exudes as qualities, values, all that. That has to be consistent, although that has to evolve as well. So professionals within that, if you're in a risk capacity, if you're in a marketing capacity, I think you're striking this balance. Let's get the value from the data in a reasonable, ethical way, but let's hear more, let's listen more to customers. I don't want to suggest marketers aren't listening, but we can always do more of that. We can always just pause, stop sort of pushing and soliciting, and just pause and listen. What are they telling you? What are their behaviors indicating about what's good or bad about what you're doing? And integrate that. Don't make that something anecdotal that's just on the spreadsheet. That should be the centerpiece of your data strategy.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights made it clear that data isn't just powering marketing, It's redefining the role of the marketer. Understanding data, privacy, and risk is no longer optional, it's essential.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, if you're building a career in digital marketing, remember this: creativity will open the door, but data literacy and trust will help you grow and lead. Stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to step beyond traditional marketing roles.
And thank you both for having me today. Thanks everyone for listening. And marketers out there, market smart.
So, if today's conversation sparked new ideas about your career path, make sure to subscribe to Digital Hustle Career Pathway 101.
We are here to help you navigate the skills, roles, and decisions that shape the future of digital work.
Until next time, keep hustling, keep learning, and keep chasing those digital dreams. Bye, guys.